A while ago, I made a video on every treasure game on Sega Genesis. That was one of the videos I think I was most proud of, and yeah, there's no question I make a follow-up. I just love this company's games too much. This era I will be covering today is their output on the Sega Saturn, N64, and PS1, and Dreamcast, ranging from 1996 to the year 2000. This era definitely carries off the high Treasure was on after their Genesis output, expanding on the design philosophies while dipping into new genres, and really just cementing their status as a cult classic machine. What's most interesting is the fact that this was the entirety of the PS1 and N64 console generation, and they didn't make a single truly 3D title, focusing on design above all else. And by not taking a risk by trying 3D, they kind of take a bigger risk, considering it was seen as the future at the time. In fact, Mischief Makers on the N64 was actually the very first game on the console to be a 2D platformer. I can only think of like 3 other 2D platformers on the console. Some devs over at Treasure specifically said that 3D games and 2D games can coexist. That's an actual quote they said. Which might seem obvious now, but in the 90s, that probably would have been a way more contentious topic. And speaking of the N64, they no longer just make games for Sega anymore, which is funny because usually a company is Nintendo exclusive and switches to PlayStation in the PS1 era. Not for Treasure. Also, no licensed games this time. They just didn't end up making any. They do have more of those in their future, just not for now. So yeah, let's take a look at how Treasure took what they learned developing for the Genesis and applied it to 3D, while not really applying it to 3D. Releasing in 1996, our first game is Treasure's second G-Blank Heroes type game, Guardian Heroes, a beat-em-up RPG exclusively for the Sega Saturn. There is actually an Xbox Live Arcade version, which was the one I bought because Sega Saturn emulation is weirdly complicated. Guardian Heroes is a very chaotic game, also a very silly game, and for a beat-em-up it has a lot more content than you'd expect. There are branching paths and 4 playable characters in the main campaign, with the 5th one unlocked later. So different choices will result in you going through different stages and up against different bosses or enemies. You could even have multiple endings by these branching paths, or even a bad ending specifically caused by massacring innocent civilians and stuff. So for a beat-em-up, this might be slightly shorter than a Streets of Rage or something, but it's more packed with content, and definitely more replayable than a game like that. Guardian Heroes probably has the biggest amount of story out of any Treasure game so far. There's plenty of cutscenes and dialogues to give context to the game, and even spots of world building for this fantasy world you're in. The story might even play into a character's backstory in a way that's not really done in beat-em-ups, and it just couldn't really be done before if it weren't for this branching path thing. Like, hey, this bad guy is a member of the Blue Knights. I used to be a member of the Blue Knights. Now I have extra motivation to go storm the castle. How convenient. It's definitely not too serious of a story, and it's a little poorly translated and over the top, but you know, that also makes it a very quotable game, and I love these types of 90s games. God knows I have tons of Symphony of the Night lines memorized, and not just the ones that are memes. But don't take my word for it, see for yourself.
It's a good thing I didn't use my good sword.
That was a close one. I thought my staff was gonna break while I was juggling you.
You can plainly see why I'm a boss character, and not some lowly thug.
I'm the best. Even though my stunt double did all of the work.
I came to bury the hatchet. In your head.
Magic will always be better than fools who jump around with swords. Tell my opponent I want my throwing stars returned as soon as possible.
Also, keep in mind that the Xbox version apparently has updated translations, So the original Sega Saturn would have probably had more weirdly translated voice lines. We were robbed. So yeah, you have 5 choosable characters in the main story, and 9 continues to get through as many as 30 stages. It's playable in multiplayer, but if you're in single player, you'll actually get an NPC to help you. At first it's this girl named Serena, but then Undead Warrior will join your party. You gotta admire this 90s anime style of character design. They look kinda cool, but also their eyes are in completely different planes of existence. You'll need that NPC helper too, because this game is extremely chaotic, with just tons and tons of enemies and massive combos, the type you barely see in beat 'em ups, I find. If Final Fight is the Street Fighter equivalent to beat 'em ups, Guardian Heroes is the Marvel vs. Capcom equivalent, and just racking up damage, beating up swarms of enemies, is really fun, although you yourself are very easily susceptible to their attacks as well. You'll have fighting game-like moves, a very simple leveling up system, and your characters cover the archetypes of a usual RPG party, like a knight, a rogue, and a mage. I can confirm the one with a big sword is easily the best to play as. You have a backdash as well, which is always fun, and there's the ability to move between the background, foreground, and middle ground. That does technically make this a bit less deep than a traditional beat 'em up just from a movement perspective, but it does allow fighting game combos to work way better, so I think it's a worthwhile trade-off. It's a little thing that sets it apart from most beat 'em ups too, which is always great for this genre. I did find the enemy variety though to be surprisingly quite lacking in this game. There are like trolls or heavier enemies, but most of the time in my few playthroughs, my enemies were just kind of the same knight guys or ninja guys, and I did end up wishing for some more. There are bosses, but most of the time they're just souped up regular enemies, and they're your size or robot things, which are fun but not necessarily the highlight the way they tend to be for Treasure's games. So enemies and the combat is great fun, but still has some issues which certainly might have been caused by so much development time going into the feel of your characters and this game's branching path. We do actually get a couple of other modes besides just the story, those being arcade and versus mode. Versus is what you'd expect. It lets friends duke it out as the characters from this game, and arcade mode is really more of a survival mode. You basically go in this coliseum and fight a huge how do they put this all on a screen in 1996 crowd, and better not fuck up in the first few seconds lest you instantly die. Leveling up is automatic with no need to select what attributes, so you can basically just get better and better as you go on, but enemies do keep spawning. It's a fun distraction. Here's the real kicker though. Look at this roster. Jesus Christ, you can play as every goddamn character in this game. Everyone is here before Smash. It's really impressive, even if Civilian 4 will inevitably not be as deep as an actual protagonist. I really do wish there was more of a traditional arcade mode though, not just the story mode. Because like, look at this. I don't want this to go to waste. And sometimes you just want to beat up some guys without any story baggage. 45 characters, by the way. 45 characters. Guardian Heroes might not be the most advanced game to start Treasure's development on a 3D console, the same way a game like Light Crusader pushed the Genesis to its limits. I mean, okay, the Sega Saturn is technically a 3D console by technicality. Like 90% of its games are just fighting games. But seriously, it's still a really good foray into a genre Treasure has never touched before. It brings their own touch on the genre, and quickly jetting into the best of that genre. I probably prefer Streets of Rage, but I'm glad it exists, and it's impressive how much it manages to innovate in a genre that can sometimes have an issue with feeling samey. Next up is 1997's Mischief Makers, the first game on a console besides Sega, and their first game to not be published by Sega. It came out on N64 instead, and was published by Enix in Japan, and by Nintendo themselves in North America and Europe. This one is absolutely a cult classic, and of all these games in this video, it's probably the one I've heard the most praise about. Surprisingly, at launch, it was overall viewed at negatively, but critics have come around on it by now, and it's basically universally praised once they got out of the mass delusion in the late 90s where every non-3D game was bad. Though, it is technically a Nintendo release, so there's a very good chance the reason this game gets praised so heavily is that Nintendo fans are a bit biased towards stuff to their own consoles at times. It's just a thing I find, but it's treasure, so I'm confident in it anyways. Plus, I never really saw as much praise for Sin and Punishment, which is an actual Nintendo property. They even co-developed it. I definitely see those wanting Saki and Smash, but not quite as much people saying stuff like, remember Sin and Punishment? That was a good-ass game. That might just be me though. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's see how much mischief will be made. Or something. It's not actually me making the mischief, I don't think, by the way. Can do plenty of mischief to regular citizens, though. Mischief Makers continues the tradition of having a somewhat more fleshed out story. It centers around a robot girl named Marina going to a different planet to rescue her creator from aliens called Clancers. There's plenty of these aliens to talk to on your journey for hints, or to grab and shake if you want to be that guy. Mischief Makers is a platformer with, I want to say, light puzzle elements. There's 5 worlds and 52 levels in total to get through, but each level is rather short. They usually do actually feel substantive enough because of those puzzle elements. Here's the thing though, when I first tried Mischief Makers, I could understand why critics weren't too happy about it, because it's a slow burn. Earlier levels play up that puzzle aspect way more, and also exploration, and that's not really as present later on in the game. For example, one earlier level has you move through a 2D-like maze to find these alien kids, but that never really happens later on, so critics could probably easily develop an idea of the game as all of these weird mission-based tasks earlier on, but no, it becomes more like a platformer later on, and it does take some time to settle into. Marina's controls in general also kind of take some time to get used to. They're not clunky or bad or anything, you just have a lot of abilities that might not be as straightforward to use. Like, a lot of the platforming involves grabbing these ball things, and you can just jump off of them. But you have to press one button to fling yourself, and you have to also hold the opposite direction while doing it, and that doesn't sound that complicated, but in an actual platforming situation, it's kind of finicky. That's just one example, but there are a few basic movement options that aren't that intuitive, so you have to have a few things memorized. That said, there are some rocket jumps and some such, so movement in and of itself can be pretty fun. Enemies are pretty minimal. The way you engage with them is Marina's signature move of grabbing and throwing enemies. It's not an action platformer, really. Grabbing is just really fun, too. Platforming is surprisingly precise and snappy. It's difficult to talk about because the types of levels vary a lot. You might get one level with minimal enemies, followed by a level with one mechanic you engage with more like a puzzle, and then a mini-boss, and an actual boss. I really enjoyed how this game feels like a small dollop of ideas from all across 2D platform history, with the precise platforming of a Donkey Kong Country, to the puzzle elements of a Mario World Ghost House, to the grabbing and throwing of something like Klonoa. Not saying that was necessarily intentional. Klonoa did release after this game after all, but it's just a neat observation. Mischief Makers doesn't go too in-depth with each of these mechanics due to its levels being so short, but it is pretty fun to jump across different ways of playing so often. Also, if you happen to shake something downward...
Shake, shake!
Shake, shake. I love Shake, shake so much. It's so adorable. Yeah, girl. Shake, shake. If Shake, shake has no fans, I am dead. So silly that I love Shake, shake. Shake, shake, goddammit. Shake, shake. I'm sorry, I need a minute. Hi, Oliver. Shake, shake. He's not a fan. Bosses are a highlight, and oh my god, a treasure game with good bosses? Absolutely unprecedented. But seriously, these are some of the best bosses in the company's history. They look great, and tough as they are, they're a lot of fun and work incredibly well with Marina's moveset. Gunstar Heroes or Dynamite Heady probably have more variety with their bosses, but Mischief Makers has a lot more precise and longer bosses. At least for the end of their worlds, not really the mini-bosses. The story is pretty cute, and the game might look pretty cheap or poorly aged from a glance, but in motion it looks great. Mischief Makers is easily one of Treasure's best games ever. It's a super well put together platformer, with everything that makes Treasure's classics great put into that more traditional style. And hey, guess what? No stupidly limited amount of continues. Hopefully that won't be a thing in the future, right? Anyways, Silhouette Mirage. Silhouette Mirage ended up being one of the games I felt the most mixed on. Silhouette Mirage is back to Treasure's run and gun titles, but this time it's a little less geared towards overwhelming enemy forces and chaos in every direction, and more towards its central gimmick. For you see, you're a witch named China, who's the guardian of justice, and listen up liberals, there are only two genders, Silhouette and Mirage, and you gotta stop that. So, each enemy will be either one of those, which can be represented by their color. You shoot either a Silhouette or Mirage blast, based on which direction China is facing, and you can only damage enemies if you've got the opposite type of blast from them. You can also run on walls and stuff, so movement is way different as well. I really like the way characters are designed, and just look at this cover. Pure, distilled 90s anime, that's the good stuff. But as for the game itself, I have issues. This game tries very hard to give you easy options to switch from Silhouette to Mirage, like grappling opponents, but it's still horribly awkward at times to have to switch, because it's not a button that decides it, it's literally the way your character is facing. It almost feels more restrictive than additional, and it doesn't do too much to justify it in my eyes. Some cool puzzles or things making use of your abilities besides just attacking enemies could have been nice. It's not bad or anything, because there is some fun to be had in figuring out how to switch over or what weapon to use at times, but yeah, it's not as great as it could have been. The bosses can be pretty fun if they're one of those big size screen bosses. And even then, there's not a guarantee they'll be that good, because the game just has a lot of boring parts. The enemies and actual levels are mostly kind of meh as well. Again, there's definitely some fun to be had, and I don't think it's a bad game. I might even say it's a good game, but it's more like your average game, not necessarily the absolutely great stuff Treasure makes. So, this is a weird complaint, I know, but I just want to walk you through something that happened. I died 9 times and ran out of lives as you do, so after getting a game over, I re-entered the game and I started the exact same level I died at with the amount of health I had when I started, which was a tiny sliver and no lives. Why? Why not just make me restart the game or something? I very much dislike having to restart each time like that, but it's a short enough game that I wouldn't mind that much. Oh, who am I kidding? Of course I would still complain. Especially because most of the dialogue isn't skippable. Silhouette Mirage is unfortunately one of Treasure's weaker games. I'm not gonna say the Silhouette Mirage concept was bad or anything. That's like Silhouette Mirage, like, you know. But it was definitely something that requires a lot of care to get feeling great. Care which wasn't exactly implemented in the best way. I don't think it's the worst game at all, but maybe it'd be like bottom 3 so far, alongside McDonald's and that Yu Yu Hakusho game, which those games are still really good, so there's still a high bar. And a really high bar it is, because guess what? The next game is the predecessor to Ikaruga, which is the treasure game I heard talked about probably the most besides Gunstar Heroes. I won't actually talk about Ikaruga today, but Radiant Silver Gun is still similar to it, and from what I can tell, a pretty damn cool game. But before that, let's have a little intermission, shall we? Now, Treasure's characters can have some really iconic designs, so today we're going to be ranking each of the Treasure protagonists' fits so far. Got it? Let's go. Yusuke is literally just wearing a school uniform. Sorry man, you're on the bottom, do better. I don't know what Gunstar Blue is wearing, but it's dumb. It's kind of dumb. Gunstar Red is wearing the exact damn thing, but red looks a little bit better on him in my opinion. Again, love Hikuwabara, but it's literally just a school uniform. I like the blue look better than green though. Sir David is just wearing a suit of armor. I mean, it's not bad, armor's cool, but it's kind of just a standard night outfit. I don't even know what Randy's outfit is. Like, what is it even called? I respect it, but I cannot in good consciousness place this any higher. Marina's outfit is just iconic. Why did the professor make Marina's waist the size of 2 of her fingers and her thighs bigger than her head though? I don't know, ask him. That's not really related to her fit. Does she have a fit? This is the design for Kurama, I'm taking into account, and I think it looks a little silly, but it highlights the character design fun, I don't know. I like the contrasting light blues and whites of Nicole's outfit quite a lot, and gotta love the cape. Very 90s anime. Han's just your classic big beefy knight, so I mean, I like how exaggerated he is too. Just look at his knees. Gotta love Genjiro's bright green ninja outfit. Although, I do feel like his elbows not being covered up is kind of impractical. Maybe that impracticality makes it cooler. Hie's outfit is dark, fucked up, and edgy. Thank God hair doesn't play a part in this. How do you look so polite? Look, he looks so silly. Look at his shoes, his bow tie. I know I said Sir David was low because he was just a suit of armor, but tell me Epsilon Eagle doesn't deserve this spot. I love the blue bits on his torso too. I mean, Ronald McDonald, you gotta respect the timeliness of the fit and the everlasting power of Ronald McDonald's outfit. I like contrasting details in character designs a lot, so Shina wins. Okay, Radiant Silvergun time. I know, I've said before how Treasure makes a bunch of different games in a bunch of different genres, but I want to acknowledge how profoundly impressive it is that their first foray into a shoot-'em-up game turned out to be one of the most mechanically complex and satisfying games of the genre. Its mechanics are so developed, you'd think it would be made by a company with decades of experience in this genre, but no, it's their first shoot-'em-up. Radiant Silvergun is not just the coolest titles for a game, it's one of Treasure's coolest games ever. And that is the upgrade system. The most genius part of the game by far, and the method by which you might stand a chance. The woke liberals won, and there are now 3 genders. Red, blue, and yellow. By shooting 3 enemies of one type, you get a chain bonus, which upgrades one of your abilities. This serves 2 purposes. First is to make the game sort of a puzzle, and add depth to gameplay. If you want to get better, you can't just shoot randomly, you have to add focus. You focus on getting chain after chain to improve your game, giving this a whole new layer of gameplay. The second is that your upgrades save. You can get super strong in one game, and that will save if you play again. So theoretically, the more you play, the easier this game gets. If you're able to stick it through, it's a very rewarding title. You'll still need to pay attention when you play, of course, but after just a little while of playing, earlier areas or bosses that gave you trouble when you first played can be nothing to you when you play it later on. Of course, this rewards patience too, and it's one of the most satisfying experiences I think a game could have. Recently, I've seen the game Hades be praised for basically this exact mechanic, so yeah, if you dig the way it's done there, you'll probably like this. The game is actually kind of like a roguelike, but not randomized, and with the same weapons each time. Okay, this game is not like a roguelike. Another notable shakeup of Radiant Silvergun is the amount of weapons you have. You got like 7. Basically, most of a Switch's buttons that you would use for a game are covered. And they also cover a wide variety of situations you need to go through in Silvergun's levels, especially the way these block things come in and out of the screen, changing where your ship needs to fly. This adds another layer to the game, and this alone could have been a vertical shooter's main gimmick. You don't get this in Galaga. If you're playing the story mode, aka the console version, there are some cutscenes and, well, a story. Which is so incomprehensible, I didn't even try. Something about a stone-like object. Also, each of the stages aren't played in chronological order if you're paying attention to that story. So you literally play what's called Stage 3 first, then Stage 2, and then 4, then 5 and 6, and the finale is Stage 1. That's so stupid, you can't help but love it. Radiant Silvergun is another example of treasure perfection, and yet another example of them revolutionizing a genre you might not think there'd be that much room for innovation for anymore. And guess what? It's not even as critically liked as Ikaruga, so get excited for if I were to follow up this video. Also, I almost forgot, you can change the chain system to that of Ikaruga, so that's a nice bonus if you've gotten into these types of games through that game. Our next title is probably one of Treasure's more obscure games. The 1999 Japan exclusive PS1 crayon-themed fighting game. I mean crayon art style, you're not literally playing as crayons. Rakugaki Showtime. If you've ever heard of this game, it's probably either because it's super obscure, or because Marina from Mischief Makers is a guest character in it. Look how silly she looks. I don't believe Shake Shake is in this game, but her voice lines would actually later be used in the Smash Remix mod, so there's a nice piece of trivia for you. Rakugaki Showtime is a 3D fighter like Power Stone. You technically can beat enemies by just hitting them, but you'll want to throw items to do most of the attacks, specifically this smiley ball. This game doesn't have the variety of Power Stone in terms of items, because that ball is your main way of attack, which makes it a bit less chaotic in some ways, but gives it more of a mad dash feel. The fighting has some fun to it, but it mostly feels tedious to me. 90% of the time, the way you beat an enemy is just throw that ball at them, and the stages are pretty lacking in any interesting gimmicks or just stuff to make them more compelling. It's not the best, really, and it's pretty unfortunate the stages feel this way, because the game does feel pretty good to play. You get to dash and leap and bound all over the place, and there's still definitely fun in it. It's clear this isn't as fun in single player. I I was in single player exclusively, and I found it not the best, but it seems like a lot of fun with friends. In single player, it can get tedious. The arcade mode was about the only thing I could actually access since Japanese, but I don't think there were too many modes. It doesn't help this bland feeling that there is 12 battles in the arcade mode. That's too much. Honestly, I feel like anything more than 10 battles in an arcade mode is so much unnecessary padding. The game actually does have a dynamic difficulty system for its arcade mode, which makes it either easy or hard depending on your performance. That's a neat idea, but it might be a little disappointing for someone specifically who really wants to play hard mode. I don't know why you would, but I guess the possibility is there, and this seems like a bit too much work for not that much benefit, but it's neat, I guess. There's also tons of characters in the game, by the way, which is neat for sure. They've only played as a few of them, but they do have a distinct enough feel to feel different from each other, and there are different types of attacks and whatnot. They can get pretty strange too. There's a psychic dog and Cloud Strife if he was a lemming. You're expected to beat the arcade mode to unlock each character, and luckily there was a cheat code to unlock all of them, so I could play as Marina. I really wish I could like this game's gameplay overall a little bit more, but everything surrounding that gameplay felt a little too half-baked for me. Not how this game looks. I don't think that's half-baked, aside from the stages maybe. This kind of goes without saying, but the art style is super charming in both the gameplay and menus. There's a 2D sprites over a 3D background effect for those stages, and wait. Does this mean this is technically Treasure's first 3D game? Kinda, right? Anyways, the stages themselves I do like the 3D look of, but they're pretty lacking in terms of background elements. They're really just visuals beyond the surface level. I mean, this is probably the most unconvincing looking dance party I've ever seen in any video game. There's even a stage based on Mischief Makers, which I didn't even recognize at first, because of the fact that it's literally a house on a flat field with one clancer just like plopped in. Rakugaki Showtime gets a full, hearty, good ideas, flawed execution from me, but there's still some stuff I did enjoy, and I guess I would say I liked it. Our next and penultimate game is Bongai O, releasing in 1999 on N64 and Dreamcast. Because Treasure doesn't exactly have loyalty to one system. And who's ever heard of a game that released on N64 and Dreamcast but not PS1? Like what? Also, the N64 version is Japan exclusive for some reason, so I'll play the Dreamcast version. We are back to shoot 'em ups with this game, so I'm pretty excited. Well, like a shoot 'em up run gun hybrid, but that's making me more excited. Bongai O has some pretty damn solid design, but at the same time, I'm not that big of a fan. I like it better than Rakugaki Showtime, but there's some stuff I don't rock with I'll get into later. You get 44 fairly short stages with a time limit, and essentially need to shoot everything in sight, including a bunch of ships and enemies firing at you. It's really satisfying just plowing through levels, and racking up a high score by destroying everything. There are two characters you can switch between, with one having homing attacks, and one having attacks that bounce off of walls. I find the homing one to generally be more useful in combat, and that bouncy one to be more suited to puzzle-like areas, or just blocks and lasers you need to destroy to get forward. Those parts are light enough to not distract from the fighting, and add depth, so it's good. It's good for sure, and fits the gameplay well. I'd say your real option of attack is your burst attack. It's a powerful move you get through collecting fruit all over the level. Bongai O is a Crash Bandicoot game confirmed, and that adds some depth as well. Each stage has a brief boss, which are usually the same size as you, and a pretty simple fight. Until you realize how unbelievably easy they are to cheese. Like, it's actually pretty funny. You can potentially shoot all your bullets at once, maybe even obliterating their life bars too, but they can shoot all your blasts at you as well, and there's no hit stun, which can instantly kill you, so there's some risk too. Why didn't I like Bongai O as much as other treasure games? Well, because other treasure games are really, really good. That's kind of it. It's just that this game is good, but not as much as other treasure games. The movement is kind of odd to get used to, and results in a lot of cheap deaths. Like, you move with the D-pad, but if you want to lock in and shoot, you gotta do it with the joystick. At least there is a lock and shoot button, because the lack of one was my biggest problem with Gunstar Heroes, a now 6-year game, which is, in fact, shorter than the amount of years Treasure is currently on hiatus. What the hell happened? This game did originally release on N64 though, so maybe they didn't make the controls of this port that good. Anyways, they never really tell you how to do that, so yeah. This game has a lot of tutorials to explain how they work, which is good, but thanks to the bad translation, they are incomprehensible. And look, man, I like bad translations. They can be really funny. But it's been going on for Treasure so much that it's starting to get a little frustrating. And when I actually start going into the deep parts of mechanics and trying to explain them, I don't like that you're getting a compromised experience. Treasure is still a pretty low budget studio, so I do understand it, but like, they're getting their games published by Enix. Mischief Makers had a fine translation though, so this might be a publisher by publisher thing actually. There was also some slowdown at times, which was never really something in their games before, but that might just be my emulator. So at the point we're at, I'd say Treasure is still a legendary developer and hasn't really had a big miss. Smaller things, of course, but they still pretty much have an unbroken streak carried way from the Genesis era. That said, Treasure games are beginning to feel like they lack potential or just fell short in some smaller ways, so I hope it's not a thing that continues for too long. They've never been perfect, so it's not that big of a concern for me, honestly. Our final game is next. Released in 2000 for N64 and actually published by Nintendo this time. Sin and Punishment. Sin and Punishment is another of those shooty bang bang games, with this being more of a rail shooter. It's more than just the Nintendo game with the single most metal title ever, though. I feel like I've used this joke before. The big gimmick and what makes this game unique is probably the movement, which, here's the thing. This game was very specialized to the controller of the platform it was released on. The goddamn N64. When it was localized for a goofy-ass 3R man controller. It does actually control surprisingly well though on Switch, which was nice to see, and the way you move around is janky in a fun sort of way, which is the motto for the N64 to be honest. With movement being done by pressing Y or A, shooting being done with ZL, and jumping done with the L button. It's not Switch GoldenEye levels of unplayable, but it's still a hill to get up. Thanks to the simplicity of the game though, I feel like the gameplay and the atmosphere is most of why you even play it. Even for a late gen game, it looks great. And this is one of Treasure's games I find myself the most immersed in. Just jumping and rolling around, blasting guys who are yelling about how I'm toast. There's some pretty cool enemy designs too. So yeah, that's kind of most what I like about this game. The gameplay never caught me too well as it did for other titles, but it's still better than like 50% of Nintendo's other titles on the N64 at the time. And when I say stuff like the gameplay never really caught me as much, that never means the game's bad, in these videos at least. Just not super addicting and riveting for me, you know? I do like that Sin and Punishment has a cult following today and gets into Smash and stuff though. It's nice to see this little company whose first completed game was a McDonald's game now giving us one of Nintendo's icons. This is a simple game, but it's worth playing a few levels if you get bored and have N64 online. Also, story treasure, but if you don't localize a game, I don't talk about its story. Those are the rules. It is actually voiced in English, but good luck figuring out what they're saying. Okay, the bad voice acting is actually pretty charming now. There's also a fight against the Little Earth, by the way. Just thought I'd mention that. Speaking of which, there are 2D side-scrolling bosses, and those are a highlight for sure. I guess you can technically call them fighting mini-games. Shout out to the character designs, by the way. I think they're completely ruined after this game, because characters should have stayed looking like weird bug people like they do in the original Sin and Punishment. I noticed in this 4-year time period, yes, that was only 4 years, I didn't find myself as smitten with these games as much as Treasure's output in the Genesis era. Knowing that, would I say Treasure is falling off or less good now? Hell no. They were still creating tons of new experiences, and the games they wanted to make. You can tell they aren't made just for commercial viability. They're made because people wanted to make them. No, I wouldn't say they've fallen off. Ultimately, Treasure's output in this area just suffers from the problem of not being literally exactly what I wanted and catering to my exact tastes. But if you're a fan of more shooty games, then yeah, this is about some of the best games you can get. But as for me, I'm not really that attached to Bongai O or something. Mischief Makers and Radiant Silvergun though are probably my most enjoyed of these games, and I am going to remember them for a while. I do suppose I might as well rank all of these games now, so let's do that before I end this video. Quickly, and not just these, all the Genesis era games too. From weakest to best. Rakugaki Showtime, Yu Yu Hakusho Maikyo Toitsusen, Silhouette Mirage, McDonald's Treasureland Adventure, Bongai O, Sin and Punishment, Guardian Heroes, Dynamite Heady, Light Crusader, Mischief Makers, Alien Soldier, Radiant Silvergun, and Gunstar Hero is still the best. It was pretty close though, and if I ever do play Ikaruga, I wonder if it'll take its spot for the number 1. For now though, it's gonna be a long time until I might continue this series, so I'm gonna say goodbye to the series and company for a little while now. Oh, who am I kidding? I'm gonna replay these games quite a lot from time to time now. But sorry to all you Stretch Panic fans who wanted me to talk about your little game. I know there's just so many of you. For now, I can say Treasure continues to win. Thanks to everyone who helped out with this silly Guardian Heroes lines, and thanks everyone for watching. I'll see you later.